Hey, great to see everybody. Welcome to Real Life. We are so glad that you're here, whether you are inside, outside, watching online, Canyon Country, Simi Valley. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a great NFL kickoff weekend. I mean, does it get any better than that? I'm just so excited about that. I was going to wear my Chiefs jersey, but I'd offend all the Chargers fans, so I'm sorry, but we're going to win anyway. So anyway, we're just so thrilled that you're here, and we're continuing in this series as we're talking about this whole issue of, joy and how do we find happiness. And here's kind of where we're going today. We're going to talk about this thing that a lot of us wrestle with in our life, and that's the people in our life that cause us a little bit of misery, that cause us a little bit of problems. In fact, I've got some pictures for you we're going to put up here on the screen, and I want you to see if you can identify what these are. Let's take a look at this first one here. Can anybody see what this one is? Okay, that's a sucker fish, okay? And it's literally sucking the algae off the side of the tank. If you have tanks with lots of fish in them and that kind of thing, that's a great thing to have. Okay, so here's another picture. Anybody identify what this one is? Oh, okay, it's a vacuum cleaner, exactly. And maybe some of you men didn't know what that is, but it's kind of like a lawnmower, but it's inside. So anyway, that cleans up the house, and it's a great thing as well. All right, here's another one. Let's see if we can figure what this one is. Okay, it's a leech, okay? And what does a leech do? It sucks blood, that's right, okay? And then here's a final one. Okay, what's this one? Yeah, a mosquito, that's right, okay. And what does it do? It sucks blood as well. All right, now, you kind of see what we're going at with here, and these things are all things that suck something out of you or something out of somebody else or the fish tank or whatever. And here's where I'm going with this. You all know someone like this, don't you? And they suck the life out of you, right? They're that individual when they come in the room, you go, oh, they're here. Great. They're the individual that said, hey, we're coming for Thanksgiving. And you're like, oh, do we have to have Thanksgiving this year, right? They're the individual that, when you drive home and they come out of their house, you just act like you are driving somewhere else or you're on the phone, okay? True confession, anybody ever pretended they're on the phone okay? And then your phone rings okay. Yeah, so we've all kind of had those experiences of being around those kind of people, and it kind of drags the life out of you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to figure out how to deal with those kind of individuals. Now, let's just kind of get the other end of the continuum figured out here. How many of you can just right now think of somebody who's the happiest, most joyful person that you know? And I don't mean a fake happy. I don't mean kind of sappy, Southern charm kind of happy, right? But they're literally grateful for everything in their life. They have a confidence in God that you actually believe, and it's not just kind of a bumper sticker kind of faith, right? They have this idea in their head, they're always looking forward to the future. They love life. They love what's going on. Even when things are bad, they find this deep kind of joy in it. You want to be around them. Now, think about the opposite of that. Who is that person in your life? They're the most unhappy person you know. They're the most joy-challenged person that you know. They're bitter, they're negative, they complain about everything. Now, think about that person. Don't look at that person. Don't point at that person. Don't elbow that person. Some of you are real nervous right now. Oh, I hope they don't think I'm looking at them, but I'm thinking of them. You know who I'm talking about. All right, we've all got somebody in mind. Well, today we're going to talk about the very thing that may be in the way of you finding the joy that you want in your life. And guess what? It's not them. You think it's them. You think they're the joy sucker in your life that's sucking the life out of you. But the thing that's standing as the barrier to joy in your life actually isn't that person. And we're going to figure out how to deal with that. Okay, so if you've been with us over the past few weeks, we've been walking through this letter that was written in the first century by a guy that we refer to as the Apostle Paul. If you've ever heard that term before, apostle, that just means somebody who's been with Jesus, okay? A disciple was one that followed Jesus. An apostle was somebody that actually had been with Jesus. And though Paul hadn't been with Jesus much, he saw him after Jesus had come back from the dead, changed Paul's life, even changed his name from Saul to Paul because he wanted a brand new life. And he went around telling people about Jesus, spends about 30 years of his life, the rest of his life, going around and planting churches, starting churches. And during that time, while he's doing this, he plants his church in Philippi, and he writes a letter to them about 10 years after he had been there. Now, here's why that's significant for us, because we still have this letter. This letter was passed down throughout the centuries. It's been verified by all the different manuscripts and copies we have throughout the years, and we can trace it all the way back to the first century and authenticate it as legit. And Paul writes these words to these people to encourage them. And we still have it today, and it's part of our New Testament, which is part of what we call the Bible. Now, here's what's going on in Paul's life. Paul is heading back to Jerusalem, and he goes to the temple to teach about Jesus. And when he does that, all the Jewish leaders are mad. They're frustrated that Paul has done this, and so they drag him out of the temple, and they're just beating him up, intending to kill him, and they want to beat him to death. And this is where somebody decides to call 911. And they call the police, and who are the police? It's the Roman soldiers, because Rome is kind of over the Jewish nation at this time. They're the leaders in the world, and Nero runs everything. And here come the Roman police, and they drag off all the people that are beating up on Paul. They just start asking who's doing what, well, he did and she said and all that. And they figure out that Paul's the epicenter of it all. So they just think, all right, we're going to take you and we're going to throw you in jail. And Paul says, is that what you do to a Roman citizen? Because Paul's not only Jewish, but he's also Roman. And now they're like, uh-oh, what do we do with this? I mean, this is kind of a quandary we've got here. So they decide to ship him back to Rome, let them deal with him. And he literally gets on a boat, and he's being chained below in the boat. And while out on the boat, this huge storm comes up, and they're lost at sea for a couple of weeks. Can you imagine? It's bad enough to be on a boat lost at sea, but now you're chained up down below. And then this shipwreck happens, and all these things go wrong. And then they wash ashore. And while he finally gets to Rome, what do? They throw him in prison. And then one day, probably about 3 years after he's there, they come to his, cell where he's at. And they say, Paul, let's go for a walk. And they walk outside the city about 3 or 4 miles, and they behead him. And that is the end of the Apostle Paul as we know him. But during that time, while he's in prison, he writes several letters, one of which is this letter we have about joy. Now, you would think, if there's anybody who could complain, if there's anybody who has a right to be bitter, if there's anybody who has a right to literally suck the joy out of the room and out of everybody around them and be a Debbie Downer, it's the guy that's been shipwrecked and beat up and left for dead and now put in prison and soon to be executed. But instead, he writes a letter about how to find true joy. And in this letter, he talks about joy over 16 times in this very short little letter. And as a result, 2,000 years later, even though Nero was the emperor of Rome, 2,000 years later, people named their sons Paul and their dogs Nero. Think about the living legacy of this guy. And a lot of it has to do with this letter. So if you've missed any of the talks over the past several weeks, you can catch up online. And if you missed last week, you definitely got to see that because Mike Bro did an amazing job explaining that passage. And we're going to pick up right where he left off. Here's what Paul writes next. He says, therefore, my dear friends, let's stop right there. Anytime you see the word therefore in the Bible, you should stop and ask this question. What is it? Therefore. Okay? Which means what's before this. And here's what's before this passage. If you were with us last week, Mike Bro had a ladder out here and he talked about the levels in society, all the way from royalty down to slaves. And he said, this is what people lived with back then. This is what we still live with today. And this is where Jesus came from. And he lowered himself in true humility. And here's what Paul's picking up on right after that. He says, therefore, because of what Jesus did, Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now, much more in my absence, continue to do what Jesus did. Continue to humble yourself. Continue to submit even when you're in a difficult situation. Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now let's stop right there. That's a scary phrase. Work out your salvation. What does that mean? Because that sounds like I've got to earn my salvation. That seems like work for your salvation. Well, keep in mind, Paul is writing this to Christians, to people who have already professed their faith in Jesus and decided to be followers of Jesus. And he even addresses them in the first chapter, if you remember back to the week 1, we talked about this, as saints. And for everybody in here who has done that, you know that you are saved not by what you have done, but by what Jesus has done. You are saved by this amazing word we call grace. And it's because of that grace that you've been saved. Salvation happens in an instant, but transformation takes a lifetime. And he says, I want you to continue to work out your transformation. I want you to continue working out that salvation that you once received and now have because of Jesus. Not, I want you to get good enough to earn God's favor. Now, this is so big. And for some of you right now that you think, I'm not sure what I think about this whole God thing, and I'm just here because somebody promised me something, and I'm just watching online because I was threatened or there's nothing else on TV. Guess what? This is the good news you need to hear. If you are waiting to come to Jesus until you get your act together, you don't have to wait. If you are waiting until you got enough good deeds socked up where you can say, you know what, I can now go because I think I'm good enough to put myself around a bunch of church people, guess what? If that's the case, then you're going to be better than us because we're all messed up, okay? The reality is we're all just, broken people that desperately need the grace of God. And it doesn't work where you get yourself put together and then come to Jesus. It happens the other way around. And Paul says when you give your life to Jesus, guess what? Full completion begins to happen. Now, I love that phrase there, full completion. And we talked about this a little bit week 1, that it's God's job to finish the work he started in you. In other words, God has been working around you to bring you to knowledge of him. He's put people in your life that have got you here today. He's put people in your life who have got you to turn on the computer today or watch this later on during the week. And you're watching this because he's used other people in your life to get you to this place. But the moment you say yes to Jesus, then he starts doing a new work in your life. And it's God's job to finish that. But you know what our part is? It's to partner with him. That's what full completion means. And this is so cool. You know what that word means in the original language, full completion? It means a gold mine. Isn't that cool? It's this image of full completion means to mine every little ounce of gold out of the mine. We won't stop till we're done. And what Paul is saying here is what God is doing in your life is he's pulling out all the good that he wants to do in your life, and he's going to dig into it, and he's going to get rid of the bad, and he's going to bring out the good because he's got something great for you. Your life is so much more than just a job or just living on the street that you're in or driving the old beat-up car that you hate or just kind of a few people that you know. It's bigger than that, and he's got a purpose for you. And that's what he says next. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. That means God working in you is not just so you'll be a better person. Isn't that what we all think church is? I got to go to church. I got to be a better person. I know I should. I know I should. I know I should. And we should all over ourselves, right? And I had to work really hard and practice that phrase, all right? And we do that to ourselves, right? Oh, I really should do this. I really should do that, But that's not the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus changes you, and now he wants to do something new in your life, and that God's got a purpose for you beyond just all the things that you think you should be doing or all the things that you think you should stop doing. And he's got a good purpose for you so much bigger than what you think you're about right now. And then, on top of all that, that's good news, wouldn't you say? That's good news that God wants to do some great stuff in your life. And then Paul does this. This is so great. He says God's got to work in you. He's completing something in you. He will not stop. He'll mine the gold. He's got some purpose for your life. But here's the one way you could stop it all. Here's the barrier to your joy. And guess what? It is not that person that you think is the joy sucker in your life. It is not your brother-in-law. It is not your mother-in-law. It is not your neighbor. It is not your boss. It is not that child that you think, I don't even know how to deal with you. It is not the people around you. Guess who the joy sucker is in your life and in mine? It's us. And Paul says, you want to know what the joy sucker is in your life? You want to know how to stop God mining this gold out of your life? Here it is. And that is that you need to stop complaining and grumbling and arguing. So he says this, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Now, isn't that such a strange thing for him to say right there? Wouldn't you think he would say something else? All right, God's going to do all this stuff, so here's what I need you to do. Perfect church attendance. You need to memorize everything that I've written. You need to pray 8 hours a day. And he says, you know what? If you really want to experience the fullness of what God has for you, then you need to do everything without grumbling or arguing. It doesn't mean you never confront. There are moments that we have to look evil in the eye and say that's injustice, and that will not happen anymore. There are moments that we need to go to somebody and say that needs to stop. But grumbling is the reflection of a spirit of ingratitude. Grumbling is when you move from a critical eye that could point out something that's not right to a critical spirit, and everything is wrong. And that is that moment in our life when we sabotage our own joy. And grumbling not only takes away joy, it's like a cancer to everybody around us. Look how he continues this. This is so great. He says, do everything without grumbling or arguing. And in some translations it says complaining. So that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Now, this is really interesting to me because he says, so that, okay? He's going to give us the reason. And he could have said, you know what I need you to do? I need you to not lie so that you'll become pure and blameless. Or I need you to be, a perfect church attendance or whatever so that you'll be pure and blameless. I need you to memorize the Bible so that you'll be pure and blameless. But instead he says, I need you to shut your mouths and to quit the complaining and to quit the grumbling and the arguing and the woe is me. And this is a guy who's in prison. This is a guy who's about to have his head taken off. This is a guy who's been through more pain and more difficulty than most of us will ever see in our lifetime. And this is a guy who says, we don't grumble. We don't argue. We do not complain. And when we finally stop doing that, we will be blameless and pure. And then look what happens as a result of that. Look what he says next. Then, once you stop it, once we all shut our mouths, you will shine among everybody else like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I'll be able to boast in the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in vain. Here's what he says. You got people in your life that you want to see the goodness of Jesus. You got people in your life that you wish would come to understand the grace of God. It is not about the amount of Christian t-shirts you have or bumper stickers on your car or verses you memorize or how loud you pray at lunchtime in the cafeteria. It is about you stopping your complaining and arguing and grumbling, because if you do that, you will shine like a star in this world. Now, friends, this was written back before social media. Can you imagine what would happen if we would all stop complaining on social media? People would look at you like somebody hacked your account. What happened? Somebody hack in and say nice things? Are you off social media now? I don't see any, negative rants about the government or about ISIS or about the world or about everything's going to end and all the negativity. No. The moment we stop with all of the gossip and the complaining and the arguing and the grumbling, we stand out like bright stars in the universe. And he says, people will look at us and go, what is it about you? You have joy. So then he says this fascinating turn of a phrase here. He says, but even if I am being poured out like a drink offering, and some of us, we've heard the phrase, pour one out. We don't know what this phrase means, okay? Some of you tracking with me. This is literally pouring wine onto a fire, and it just billows up with smoke. It's a way they would offer an offering. And he says, even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on a sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. Here's the metaphor he's giving us. Your responsibility in life is not to perfect everybody else by filling up their cup with all the knowledge and goodness you have to give. Your responsibility is just to empty your cup. I used to get so confused by this because I would think that as a pastor, my role was to fill every single one of you, your cup. And when people would come up to me and say, you know what, I'm just not getting enough here. I'm just not getting fed. It's not deep enough. I need a little bit more. I'd go back to the study and I'd read a little bit more and throw in a little bit more Hebrew and Greek and come in here and talk about it. Somebody else would come up and say, you know what, I'm just not getting enough. I need some more. Okay, I'll work a little. Then I realized, whoa. You know what, that's not my job. My job's just to empty my cup. And your job is just to empty yours into the life of somebody else. Will it ever be enough for somebody? No, because no human being can fully satisfy another. Only Jesus can do that. And Paul says, here's the deal. The reason I don't get all bitter and complaining and grumbling and all that is I just know my role, and that's just to pour my life out. And you all can do with it what you want. And if I live for a long time, or only live a few more years, I've done what I'm supposed to do. So let me just make it real practical for you. You may think that because you don't have kids right now, there's nobody you can pour your life into. Think again. There's somebody you can mentor, somebody younger than you. Help out in our student ministry. You'll find somebody really quick that desperately needs a mentor in their life. Husbands, let me ask you this. You spend most of your time talking about how your wife doesn't meet your needs. Do you meet hers? Are you pouring your life out to meet her needs and to just give all that you possibly can? Wives, are you constantly thinking about all the ways your husband doesn't fulfill all your great expectations and doesn't live up to the images you see on social media? Are you just deciding, you know what, I'm not going to think about that. I'm just going to give what I have? Parents, are you looking at your kids not as the people that are supposed to live out your dreams vicariously, but rather, how can I just pour my life out into you and just set you up to be great adults? Think about how this looks for students. Instead of just consuming, what if you just decided, I'm going to find somebody younger than me and help them avoid the mistakes that I have made? And Paul says, when I pour out my life, I'm glad and I rejoice because I have given of myself. And that's kind of our joy principle for today, and that's this. Joy cannot coexist with grumbling and arguing. It just can't. And for all of us, myself included, who get stuck in all the negativity of what's wrong, what could go wrong, what might go wrong, and what has gone wrong, maybe we ought to just stop and be grateful for all that's gone right. And if nothing else, Jesus died on a cross to pay for your sin and mine. And then he came back from the dead and promised to do the same for us. And if we get nothing else, isn't that enough to have joy? So let me give you a couple equations here. The first one is this. Grumbling plus arguing equals misery. And you know that. Because you can see that in other people. All they do is complain. All they do is complain. They make themselves miserable. They make me miserable. And then you complain about them. It's weird how we do that, right? Here's another one. Grumbling plus arguing equals entitlement. We sit around thinking about what I deserve, my rights, how I should get, and they should know better, and I deserve. But what if we went with this? Pouring out plus gratitude equals joy. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. You know, I got to be honest with you. This is not something that comes easy for me. I have the spiritual gift of sarcasm. It's not actually in the Bible, but I've written it in the footnotes. And I just have this propensity to see negative sometimes. And I can kind of point it out. And I try to make fun of it, and we laugh, and we have a good time, but I see it. And sometimes I can just look and find the negative. And sometimes the negative just finds me, and I like to kind of highlight it. And I've been pretty open with you that one of the things that I struggle with in my life, and something that I really hate in my life when it happens in my life, and that is camping. Okay? Because when I go camping, it brings all the negativity out of me, because camping is just the most horrific thing that anybody could experience. And so I've had horrible experiences camping. There's been the freezing, there's been the rain, there's been drunk people crashing the party, there's been one time we went camping and there was ash falling from the sky because apparently there was a fire nearby. We all got evacuated, which I was the only one that was happy about that. Let's get out of here, you know? I mean, and every summer, my kids, say, let's go camping, Dad, let's go camping. And I think, well, of course you'd love camping. I do all the work, I'm building the campsite and everything, and they just come around and ask for more. And so I think, there's no way we're camping this summer. And so this past summer, we made a decision that we were going to drive to Mount Rushmore and see that, and then make our way down to Missouri and see family. And I decided our version of camping would be to camp at the Hampton, okay? Which offers air conditioning, a nice bed, and a lovely continental breakfast. And so I said, that's our version of camping, Hampton, that's as good as it gets. And they said, oh, okay. We're going to drive up to Mount Rushmore, we're going to spend a couple of days there. And this was their kind of other idea. They said, Dad, could we, instead of staying at a hotel one night, could we rent a house? I said, all right, I'm listening. And they said, we want to rent a tiny house. I said, what is a tiny house? And they said, on HGTV, the tiny house shows where they build the cute little house and everybody lives in one room with little bunks up there and all that. And so I watched the show, and I'd seen it a few times, and I thought, well, that looks just adorable, and so we'll just do that, I said, yes, we can rent a tiny house. All right, so we find one online right out in South Dakota overlooking the Black Hills. It's beautiful. It looks like a lovely tiny home. It's going to have all the amenities and be perfect, okay? Just great. So we drive forever. We get into South Dakota. Cell service is gone. We're just, we're throwing up grass into the wind and reading the leaves of how to get to where we're going. We finally find this tiny house. We're off-roading in a minivan. I don't know if you've done that before, but that's exciting. And we find this tiny house, and this couple comes out of their home to walk over to this tiny house they've rented to us, and they say, well, there it is. And I'm thinking, I'm not seeing it. What I see is a little shack that looks like it's about to fall down. That's the tiny house. Great. All right. Well, it can't be that bad, right? So we walk inside, and it's really small, hence the word tiny. And I'm looking around, and I'm noticing that it lacks one particular thing that I like, and that's called air conditioning. And I say, how cold does it get at night? Because we're in South Dakota, so it's got to get cold. And he goes, yeah, it could get down to mid-80s tonight. Oh, and I said, okay, well, you got some kind of fan or what kind of, and he pulls up this little round fan like this, and he goes, yeah, you can plug this in. Oh, that's great. And he goes, now here's the thing you need to know. This is all solar powered. So if it's received enough sun during the day, then you're going to have power all night. It's going to be great. And I said, okay. And then about that time, a random dog, a pit bull, walks into the place and lays down on everybody's bed. And they say, come on, Big Cat, let's go. And his name's Big Cat, which I love cats. And so he gets up and leaves. And here we are stuck in this tiny home. And so we're like, all right, we're going to make the best of it. We're going to make the best of it. Do everything without grumbling or arguing or complaining, okay? So we go into town. We buy a bunch of fans for the night. We're no idiots. We're going to do this thing right. We come back late at night. We go into the tiny house. We turn on the lights. and we plug in all the fans, we open up the windows, and we're getting a good breeze in there, and it's starting to cool down. And then my youngest daughter says, Dad, will you come up and open my window up in the little bunk area? So I climb up there, and I go up to the window, and I open it up, and about 40 moths fly out. It's like the basement on Silence of the Lambs, okay? And it's all, these moths are everywhere. She's screaming. I'm trying to kill them all, you know. And then about that time, we hear a very eerie sound, and it's a sound, ooh. That's the sound of every fan and electric item in the place shutting down. Solar was done. It's at this moment that I realize we are stuck in this little tiny shed in the woods filled with moths and no power whatsoever. They've done it to me again. I'm camping. And I lay down on my bunk. They're trying to speak to me. I will not engage. And I'm just telling myself, do everything without complaining or grumbling. And my oldest daughter says, Dad, how are you able to sleep? I said, honey, if you lay real still, there's a little wisp of a breeze that comes by. And I'm trying not to think that you've tricked me into camping once more. And we get through the night, and we load up, and we bail out of there in the minivan and go to the next Fairfield or Hampton Inn that we can find. Now, here's what I learned in that moment. It was awful. But we still talk about it. And we still laugh about it. And had I turned that into me, what I wanted to do was go off on everybody for dragging me out here in the woods again, we wouldn't have had that moment. And you've got those kind of moments where you think, I'll never live through this, and then you do, and it becomes your greatest triumph. You've got those kind of moments where it's just rough, and it's down, and you think, when will this end? And God comes shining through in a much greater way than surviving a tiny house. And it all depends on how well you're going to be able to do everything without grumbling or arguing or complaining. So that's going to be our theme verse for the week. No matter what you go through, what you deal with, what you're in right now, you know what the barrier to your joy is? It's not the people around you. It's not the tiny houses in your life. Friends, it is you, and it is me. And when we choose to do everything without complaining or arguing or grumbling, that's when we find joy. Let's pray together. God, thank you. Thank you that you're a God of joy, that you provide joy in the most dark and difficult situations. And while we may not be happy all the time, we can still find joy. And we want to discover that. God, thank you that it's something that we can do that's just so practical as stopping our complaining. And the moment we do that, we could find joy. So God, I pray that you would begin to soften all of our hearts to just see the good in things and to embrace it and to just thank you for it. And to let our life be one of gratitude and pouring out our lives into others and finding true joy. Father, we love you and we thank you for your love for us. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.